Hi, my name is Brady Deaton. I'm a professor in the Department of Food, Ag, and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph. And in this video, you'll get to see an introductory class at the University of Guelph at the second year level that's looking at a range of issues that are important to understanding the important story of the extermination of the bison in the 19th century. Enjoy. The story that I'm going to tell you today is a story that we will talk about at various times throughout the entire course. We'll use it as a reference place for thinking about an allocation of resources that by all historic accounts, we could have done better. We could have done better for society by the way we managed the story of the bison in the 19th century. There are many, before I begin, tellings of this story. And more than anything, I want to encourage you to engage in an understanding of the historical account of the bison in the 19th century that is still one that we study and debate today. There are a variety of different stories that could be emphasized. The biology, the spiritual qualities of the bison, the history of European and indigenous interactions that start well before the 19th century, notions of property. I'm going to touch on aspects of many of those throughout this presentation, but not fully enough. And so in many ways, hopefully this will inspire you to understand a story about natural resources and natural resource management and about the slaughter of the bison that you will hear again and again. And in that regard, it reminds us all of the old saying, the past isn't dead. In fact, it's not even past. And so we'll take this story into the present throughout much of this course. The bison is a mythical creature, but it's also a real one. A bull could stand around 2,000 pounds, and from its shoulder to its feet, roughly 6 foot. Now, the story that I'm going to draw from a lot, including the title of this lecture, comes from the article that you will have read for this class. So that was available to you on Course Link. And so I'm going to borrow heavily from Dean Luke's 2002 story of the extermination of the American bison. But I'm also going to draw, as I go through, from other authors, including notably Scott Taylor's account more recently in the American Economic Review. Here's the numbers that should wake you up and make you want to listen to this story. Consider this. In the 16th century, across much of the continent of North America, the bison was in force at its heyday, roughly around 25 million. Even as late as 1850, there were roughly 10 million bison on the plains, an area that we'll define more fully in this presentation. And the plains will be the focus of our discussion. 40 years later, by 1890, there are only 1,000 left. Think of that. From 1850 to 1890, we go from 10 million bison to less than 1,000. And the number is even more staggering when you consider that much of the loss of the bison population occurs in a very short time between roughly 1870 and 1884. Let those numbers reverberate in your animal subbrain throughout this presentation. 10 million to less than 1,000. As we move through our early discussions in this class of supply and demand and departures from efficiency, we'll be emphasizing various aspects of property. In this story, there's going to be 3 broad characterizations of property we rely on to tell the story of the bison. The first you're most familiar with, private property, and most broadly we can think of that as a situation where individuals control the use, the transfer, and the various mechanisms of control with respect to a resource. Common property can describe a situation where a group or the collective controls the resource on behalf of its members. But importantly, in both cases of private property and common property, they are able to exclude non-owners of the resource from use. Those two characterizations of property are very different than what we say and what we mean when we use the term open access. An open access property is describing a situation where everyone has the privilege to use and no one has the right to exclude another. And in that situation, it incentivizes people, especially when the only way to get a good or to capture a resource is to kill it. It incentivizes people towards overuse. Now, as will be the case whenever we focus our economic story to a particular natural resource, whether it's oil or coal or the bison or the cod fishery, we have to explore and think about aspects of the underlying biology. As this is just an introduction to the story, I'll just make a couple of points about the way biology matters that are worthy of consideration. Cows become mature at 3 years. They deliver a single calf 2 out of 3 years. The bulls mature at around the age of 6. The bison relies on grasses that require an expansive area. And they're nomadic. And this will become important, not migratory. Nomadic just means that they're less predicted. They're not necessarily going north and south at a certain time. It's not clear exactly where they will be and when. The first couple of points emphasize an important part of the biology. These aren't rabbits. Rabbits, you might think about a mature rabbit delivering 20 kittens on an annual basis. These are not rabbits, and so anything that they run the risk of being decimated simply because of the extent to which they're able to procreate. Now, even as captivating as the bison is as a standalone animal with its size, it's the gathering of animals at various times that must have been beyond the imagination to imagine. In the fall and the spring, the herds might be small, between 50 to 200. But in the summer breeding time, these animals would come together in sometimes in excess of 100,000. There's reports in what you read for this class of them in the plains 25 by 50 miles wide. Just imagine that sight. Now, a closer examination might have shown them in these vast herds moving in small pods of 50 to 200, but they would be along the rivers and in the plains in massive numbers. And one can think about what this means in terms of the economics of hunting if you're able to hunt in the summer where they are densely populated versus when you're trying to hunt them in the winter when they're more diffuse. These biological aspects will become part of the economic story that I'm about to tell you. We good? Can I get some head shakes if we're on? All right. Here's another important part of the story. Then in the late fall and the winter months, the buffalo robe, which will become one of the first kind of initial commodities of the buffalo, gets to its thickest value. Gets to its thickest kind of hair content, and as a robe has its most value. Now we're going to focus our story, as I said, in the 16th century. The scope of the bison across the continent was wide, all the way from the east, stretching up into Canada, down into Mexico. But we're going to focus our story on essentially the the beginning of the 19th century in the 1800s, and in this area that I'll call the plains, that included Canada, the United States, and dipped down very close to Mexico. And this area would have been inhabited by numerous First Nations, some of which I'm going to just identify really quickly here. Now we're going to go through 4 epochs. The first is before the Euro-American markets, the robe markets. Then we'll talk about the robe market that existed from 1820 to 1880. Then we'll talk about the hide market, which is the market that characterizes the decimation of the bison. And then very briefly, I'll talk about conservation in the late 19th century. So we're going to focus now on the plains, the picture that I just showed you, and start to think about what the underlying property rights were, which they will be common property, and how those regulated how the animal, the bison, was harvested. So the evidence that Dean Luke presents is one of common property. And how do we know that? Well, we know that during this time period, the First Nations in this area were remarkably showing control of the way the bison could be hunted. For example, the summer hunts, when there might be breeding and calving going on, those were strictly regulated. The bison was often protected during calving, and there were evidence of intertribal conflict. Now recall when I said what the definition of common property was, I said that the group is able to control the use, which would have been evidenced by the tribal control of how people could hunt the resources, but importantly, they are able to exclude others from coming in and hunting in their areas. And that evidence of intertribal conflict, the author, Dean Luke, uses as evidence, as additional evidence, that indeed the best characterization of property rights during this period was common property. This, in some ways, given the biology, ensures that it's able to procreate in a way that sustains the population of the bison. Then we have a second period of time. And this period of time is called the robe market. And the picture that I showed you earlier, the robe starts to be valued for clothing, and companies like the American Fur Company and the Hudson Bay Company reach out to purchase these robes. And in this time, in the first start of it, there is evidence for the same set of reasons that I showed you earlier, that the First Nations communities were able to assert a form of property like common property that I referred to earlier. But as time goes on during this period, due to the migration of settlers into the western areas onto the plains, due to the movement of 2 different railroads into these areas, bringing population and potential hunters, due to ongoing military skirmishes between the U.S. military and First Nations, and of course, due to the disease that ravaged many of these areas during this period of time, the traditional common property regimes that had governed the bison for so long start to fall into what we refer to as the open access regime in the end of this period from roughly 1870 to 1884. But something else happens. We're not hunting for robes anymore. When you're hunting for robes, the best time to hunt them is in the fall and winter. And that means they're rather diffuse, spread out. And that means in terms of the cost of hunting, it's pretty costly. There's a story about a Mandan hunting party that goes out searching for the bison, only to return a week later empty-handed to find that that a small group of bison are located actually near their camp. This is testimony to the nomad nature of the bison, also to the difficulty of hunting, which would itself have kept in check the capacity of the road market to wreak devastation on the population of the bison. But now look what happens in the summer. In the summer, hundreds of thousands of bisons are gathered on the plains. Now, when you're hunting the bisons for its robes, you have to hunt them in a very different time period. The focus might not have been on the summer hunt, but when you're hunting them for their hide, it's not about the thickness of the hair. It's about the capacity to use the hide for leather. One of the things that happens now, you can hunt in the summer, in part because you can use the bison hide as a close substitute for leather. For cattle hides. And it can be used for sole leather and for machinery belts and pulleys that were in wide demand at that time. The tanning procedures that allowed basically the use of chemicals to reduce the decay of the hide so that it can be used as a form of leather, they occur also around 1970. In addition, in the late 1860s, moving into the 1870s, the railroads will become more established, separating northern and southern herds on the plains, as well as being able to bring hunters who now don't have to be nearly as good to kill a bison. They don't have to hunt in the winter months. They can be on the summers where they are lined up. And indeed, there's incredible stories of this time about how a hunter could kill, in the matter of a course of hours, hundreds of bison. Does anybody deer hunt in here? Well, okay. So a couple people. I do. One way to think about it is that they would, a good marksman could be, say, 100 yards or so downwind from the bison, set up a blind, which basically means just to hide themselves, and one by one shoot the lead bison so that they wouldn't get startled, and then one by one kill them. Also, during this period, the guns had improved a great deal. No longer front-loading rifles, but breech-loading rifles that had greater capacity. So we have a number of things all happening at once. New tanning procedures that allow for hunting in the summer. Railroads that allow for hunters to come in. New types of guns that allow for people to kill more at one given time. And an international trade for the bison hide that had, previous to this point, not been in play. These things seal the fate of the bison. This open access regime, which no one can control and exclude others from using, isn't there as a form of property to stop or mitigate the overshooting. If you're sitting there in a situation where you could say, hey, I don't have to shoot this bison and I could wait for it to procreate in an open access regime where there's nobody excluding someone else from using it, the paranoid voice in the back of your head says, but if I don't kill it, someone else will. And the way I get ownership of this resource is to do so. And story after story during this time period, especially from 1870 to 1884, is of wanton, slaughter of the buffalo during this period of time. 10 million to roughly less than 1,000. this occurs, there's a loss of the bison that by any account seems like we could have done better. Today, most of the bison that exist, about 400,000, are on privately owned ranches. The story of the bison emphasizes is a tragedy, in part because we all know there was the potential, if we organized ourselves differently, that we could have done better. That we could have done better in terms of our own wealth, that we could have done better in terms of preserving the value of the bison. But it requires an understanding of a lot of things, political things, but also an understanding of the underlying economics of it. That's one aspect that we want to discover throughout the remainder of this course so that the past doesn't become the present, that we participate in these kind of decisions, that we can understand what's transpired and avoid that coming into play. All right. That's a lot of serious stuff. We'll talk about it in a second, but let's just kind of relax a little bit, and I want to play a game. All right? All right? Come on. Like I said, we're going to spend more time with each other than we will spend with most people in the world. We might as well have fun, right? Are we in to play? Yeah, all right. I got $5 here. $5. Real $5. Someone's going to walk out with here. I want you to view yourself as a society, and I want to bid off this $5. Everyone understanding? I'm going to take the two who's not in your society, I'm going to take the two highest bids. Are we good? I'm going to take the two highest bids, and then give the $5 to the highest bid. Are we good? Everyone understand how the rules are going to be played? So these two people, you guys are the highest. You're like, say, you bid higher than her. I'll give you my $5, and I'll take both of yours. Is that good? All right. $5. Let's play. Got to play because it's fun. And we're like, who wants to bid? Start off $2. $2. Start off $2. See, yep. $2. Got somebody for $2. 3. 4. 3. Who's 3? 4. 3. Raise your hand. 3. Raise your hand. 4.99. 4. 4.90. Where's 4.99? Raise your hand. 4.99. What? 4.99. 4.99. 4.99. High five. Got $5 here. 4.99. 4.99. Come on. $5. You're going to give me $4.99. You're going to give me $4.99. You don't have to do whatever you want. It's going to go once. It's going to go $4.99. 5. Got $5. Going for 5 here. Going for 5 here. 5 going for 6. 6. 5. All right. I don't think we have to go. I'm just going to stop it. I'll give it to the 6. Obviously, I'm going to give you this, but you would, if reality happened here, think of what would happen. I would gain $11. You, as a society, would gain 5. Do you see that? All right, people, hold on a minute. So I'll make good on mine, but you don't have to pay me yours. I'm saying this on camera so I don't get sued. People, listen. There's a resource that could have produced greater value to society that's decimated by our actions. You, as a society, lost $11. You only gained 5. It's a net loss of $6. Could you have done better? There's no control over whether you can talk to each other. There were no rules in that regard. Could you have done better?